So, welcome back to another episode. And this is one that I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. And that is talk about when I turned 21. And my parents said something to me back then. They said, when you turn 21, you'll never forget that year. That'll be an important year for you. And I was like, what? I couldn't understand it. I'm like, people have multiple birthdays throughout their lives, obviously. Why would turning 21, why would you remember that one? And I never could wrap my head around it. And then the funny thing is in years looking back now, my 21st year was one of the most important years of my entire life. It really was in so much. And I'm going to get into the whole video game aspect and anime aspect and creativity aspect. I'm going to get there. This is going to be a bit of a story. It really is a story. My later years in high school, I was hanging out with kind of a rough group of people. We were all skateboarders. We were up to no good every single weekend. It's nothing I'm proud of, but it's what we were doing back then. That's just the group of people I was hanging out with and myself. We were going out, I turned 19, I had 19 into 20, and I was going out, and I know you can't believe this because you're like, no, there's no way this guy... I was fighting every single weekend of the bar. Every single weekend. I know. I was really into it too. I loved fighting. It's something I feel really, I can't believe, and looking back, but I was a real kind of intense young guy. I really was. Back then, I had long purple hair, nose ring, and I had a really bad attitude. And but I always loved video games and things like that. But I was really a rough and tumble type of guy. So I was going out, and I was getting into fights all the time, and it was just I'd hit a point when I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm kind of sick and tired of going out with my friends, getting drunk and whatever, and fucking getting fucked up and fighting people. I'm getting kind of sick of the lifestyle. I'm like, this is not really who I am. And it never really was who I was. It was never really what I wanted to do. It was nothing I aspired to do. It was just the set of circumstances at that time in my life. Those are the things I was doing. And my parents, they did something incredible, or something life-changing. They said, well, because I was born in England and I, grew up in Canada. And they said to me, why don't you go back to England, back to Yorkshire, and stay with your grandmother and go stay with her for a bit? Because I basically came home one night and I just said to my parents, I don't want to be doing what I'm doing anymore. I'm kind of sick of it. I don't know what to do. I'm hanging out with this group of people all the time. We're all doing this stuff. I kind of need an escape. And they offered me, like, why don't you go to England? And I was like, yeah. So I had some money saved, and they got in contact with my grandmother in England. And so the great thing is I'd never been, I traveled back and forth to England and stuff with my parents, and I'd done some traveling with my parents, but I'd never kind of done anything on my own. And so I got on that flight, and I flew to England, and I went and stayed with my grandmother, and I stayed there for about 4 or 5 months. Now, here's where we get into something. This was really interesting, and it was interesting to go back to, at that time, like, England in, like, 1994-ish? It must be 94-ish. It was, like, for me, staying with an old lady, there was not a lot for me to do. So what I started to do was I got back into reading, and I got back into art. Now, I was a huge artist. I always was. I always aspired to be a comic book artist. Like, you couldn't stop me drawing, and I was a huge anime artist when it wasn't cool to be an anime artist. Now it is. But in the 80s when I was doing it, people thought it was just weird. They thought it was unusual. And so really what had happened is, when I was younger, I got into anime and into comic books and drawing and video games, and I love this stuff. And I was really into it, but then all of a sudden, all this other kinds of lifestyle took over. And then I was like, man, when I was in England, I had a bit of time to get back to what was important to me in life. And I know this may sound unusual. But what was important to me, I figured it out from being there for a bit of time. I started to get back to the simpler things in my life, which were anime, video games, drawing comic books and all that kinds of stuff. I was like, this is what I really love. And this is what I need to concentrate on. This is why am I going out getting drunk every weekend back home and doing all this terrible stuff? That's not who I am. I don't want to be that. And it may sound funny, but this is when I really embraced, and I hate to say this word nerd, but it's when I embraced my inner nerd geekiness, my all of these hobbies, which at the time they were only classes as those because people called it that. I never did. I always thought that stuff was awesome, but I was like, this stuff is what is important to me, and I don't want to do anything like that anymore. I don't want to I don't want to go out and get drunk and do all that kinds of crap. I want to draw. I want to be creative. I want to really get into video games. I really want to get into anime, and that's what happened. That time with my grandmother in England was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me. It brought me back down to earth. I watched a lot of Coronation Street out there and stuff like that, but it really kind of slowed me down so I could think about what was the most important things in my life, what I personally needed, and to feel fulfilled. And I wasn't getting drunk and all that stuff. It was right in front of me the whole time. That's what always blew me away. The answers were always in front of me the whole time. And going back home, I was a changed person forever. I would never be that younger Johnny. I would never be him ever again. And I'm so thankful for that. I came home and I was like, it was so funny. I came home and I was 21 and I was like, I know what I want. I want to get so into video games and all this stuff. This is what I want to do. I'm going to get big into it. And I saw an anime at that time, which was Otaku no Video, which was a bunch of younger guys. It's an anime. A bunch of guys who embrace their inner otaku. I know, otaku is like a weird word to use nowadays. But they embraced it and they said, screw life. I'm going to be, I'm going to really get into my hobby and be an otaku. And an otaku is a fan of, anybody who's an obsessive fan with anything. And that's what I said is, I'm going to become a super obsessive fan. And this is where I'm going to channel my energy. And I got back into drawing. I started drawing comic books, and I drew hundreds of pages of comic books. It's extraordinary. And I discovered an anime store in town that a local guy had opened up called William Chow. He'd opened up Anime Janai, and I went down there, and it was the second coming of my life. It really was. I could rent and get taped for me at the time VHS copies of anime. So I started amassing even more anime. And at the time I could rent from him PC Engine games. So I rented Ys 4 before I ever bought a copy. I got Ys 4 and the great strategy game of Macross, and I discovered flash hiders on the PC Engine, and I really got hardcore about my hobby. Street Fighter the animated movie had just come out. Macross Plus was in full effect, and I grabbed all of this stuff, and Evangelion was about to start. And it was one of the best, most flourishing times of my life, and I never looked back. And I never went back to where I was at and all that kind of stuff. And I'm really happy that the hobby, that all this stuff is, could really stray me out and get me back and, focus me in life, because I was unfocused. I was completely fucked up. I was all over the goddamn place. And I had to focus. I was like, no, this stuff is cool. And that's when I said, this stuff is cool. And I embraced my inner geek nerd, whatever you want to goddamn call it, otaku, whatever the fuck you want to call it. I embraced it, and I went forward, and I've never looked back, and I've never been as happy. And when I look back on my 21st year, when I bought a Neo Geo, and, played Art of Fighting 2, and I have all those memories, and I'm so happy, and I have no regrets. And I'm 42 now, so this is 21 years ago. I have no regrets with anything that I've done in my life, and I'm so happy that I'm still in the culture of video games and anime and art and all that kinds of stuff. I don't draw as much as I used to. I usually do that for storyboarding, film stuff, or whatever, but I'm so happy how my life has turned out. And it's turned out the way it is because I embraced all of the things that people told me not to embrace when I was younger. And it kind of goes into the 40-year-old gamer episode that I did, talking about embracing your hobby and just saying fuck off to everybody else and really enjoying it. And I tell you, I've never looked back, and I don't know why. I really wanted to share the story of when I turned 21 because it was such a powerful moment in my life and changed me forever. And I've never looked back, and I've never been as happy. So anyways, guys, until next time.